Welcome, Rachel, to the Working Mumma Podcast. How's your day been so far?
It's been pretty good. Thanks for having me, Carina.
My pleasure. So before we dive into how you do working motherhood as a CEO, do you want to just share what your career journey's been? Because I understand that you previously in law and now you're the CEO of a tech company.
I am. So I did. I started my career in law and in private practice, and I pretty quickly realized that I wasn't drawn to the technical legal advisory side. And I was always drawn more to the problem solving and the people side of organizations. So I really found that I didn't want to just advise on decisions. I wanted to be involved in what was happening. And I liked being really close to the implementation. So from there, I moved actually into an in-house legal role and then more into the commercial and strategy roles, and then eventually into technology and digital businesses. And so what I love about the space that I'm in now is the opportunity to really work closely with teams to solve real problems and deliver solutions that actually have a community impact.
And how did you go about those pivots? And we'll get into that a little bit later, but just off the back, what was the experience like for you?
It's really interesting. I think there's, even though I've been across a number of different industries and quite different roles, there's probably some common threads that come through. And a lot of that's around problem solving and innovating to have an impact or solve problems in communities. And then the people side of things. And I'm sure we'll talk about my career path sort of and the pivot I did with my MBA, but it was really there that I found that passion for startups and digital businesses, and I've spent about the last decade or so then in technology businesses.
Fantastic. So at what point in your career did you go on your first maternity leave?
Yeah, so I was actually in a general counsel and company secretary role there. So I was already in quite a senior role. And that was now some time ago. My eldest son has recently turned 18. So I've got an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old now, and a 14-year-old.
And so what was then that like, as a general counsel, coming back in, navigating that return in a very senior role as well? And did you come back flexible, a few days a week? How was that transition?
I did. I came back part-time initially, and each return was actually quite different. After my first son, I came back quite quickly.
So how long did you have off?
I returned to the office when he was 7 months, and I had been working a little bit before that. And the return there, I felt a really strong need to prove myself and show that I could perform in exactly the same way. So I came back quite quickly, and I worked really hard. And I think definitely now as I look back, I think almost overcompensating.
What do you think was the background for that?
I think, look, I would hope that organizations, and certainly the one that I lead now, are a little bit different. And I had a very supportive workplace, but I worked mostly with men. My peers were mostly men. And I think my mindset at the time was, I'm going to go and have a baby, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to show that I can still do it and that nothing's changed and they can still rely on me to do everything.
And so those societal pressures of what it's like to be a woman.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think so I've got about 2 years between my first and second. And I remember receiving some feedback from a colleague who had just returned from maternity leave herself. And I think I was pregnant at the time with my second. And she said to me, I was having a conversation with her, and she said, "I think you're a terrible role model for women." I know. And it really hurt, and I've never forgotten.
Oh my goodness. And what context and why?
Because she said, you came back and you made it look like this is just how it all runs and it's so hard, and you're not showing that. And it really hurt at the time. But I think I was working incredibly hard to try and hold everything together at home, at work, and just keep everything almost as though I didn't have a baby. So I think there was some truth in what she was saying. I was showing up looking very capable and composed and not sharing how hard that was. And that conversation then really changed how I thought about being a mother at work and the example that I was setting.
And so then did it change your behaviours, the way that you showed up?
It did, and definitely towards women, certainly initially, and then more broadly, as I think became more comfortable in being able to say I'm a leader and a professional and a mother, I focused a lot more on having very honest conversations, because it wasn't as though I wasn't intentionally hiding it, but I wanted to just show that I was still capable and still able to do the role. And I think when women return to work now, they don't need to see a perfect example of what that looks like. They need to actually see real one. Someone who is working, but also honest then about the trade-offs and sometimes the guilt and the exhaustion and the constant sort of recalibration, I think. So that, look, I think that feedback, and I remember it so clearly because it was really powerful for me and has influenced in how I show up as a leader.
Because how many days were you working at the time?
At the time, I was officially working 3. I was
In
really
reality,
working
how many?
4 or 5. But it was interesting then at that time, work from home was not as accepted as what it is now. So it was about dropping off and picking up from daycare and things like that. And I was doing that more often than not 4 days a week.
Wow. And so how did that comment then shape how you then went into your second and third return to work?
Yeah, so the second, I took longer off. I took almost a year off and was much more comfortable stepping out and feeling like I wasn't going to miss out on something, or that the opportunities weren't going to weren't closing while I wasn't there. So I was much more confident and much more real then about, going from 1 to 2 is hard.
Oh, I reckon it's almost harder than going from 0 to 1 personally.
I think that's right. And then going from 2 to 3 again, and that coincided when with my eldest also starting school, which was another big transition moment. I was much more honest about what that involved, and probably a lot more protective of my time and what I needed to be able to do to be there for them.
And so were you in the same role as a general counsel
I
throughout all 3?
was, yes, and that was I think they were they were a very supportive organization, despite the pressure I was putting on myself. And that was the right time for me not to make different career decisions or move. It was about a time to be working with people who understood what I brought to the organization, recognized where I was at with a family, and were able to support that. So being able to be in that one role throughout my 3 children was actually a really big part of, I think, enabling me to stay in the workforce and continue to grow my career.
Was that a conscious decision to stay and of going, right, okay, this is going to be when I'm going to be starting a family. I want to have that stability. They already know me, because there's an element of you've already got to prove yourself, as you say, when you're returning back into work. But if you're starting a new role, that's like double whammy.
I think it was, and it was a conscious decision. It was definitely, I think with the benefit of hindsight now, I can look back and say I started to make changes almost without realizing it once I was married and we started to talk about having children, to sort of set myself on a path that enabled me to have a family. And I think that was driven as well by what I saw at the time in law firms and the culture of, the hours that you work and the time that you actually have to spend in the office. I made the decision to stay then. It wasn't a deliberate one in that I was desperate to leave and thought, no, I can't. I was it was a really safe and stable place for me. But I think had I not had children there, I probably wouldn't have stayed for as long, because I would have moved on for other challenges and things like that.
And how did you find the subsequent return to works of how you showed up and I guess the confidence, and also then managing that integration? Because as you said, the first time around, you're feeling like, oh my goodness, I've got to prove myself, which I have to probably say to everyone listening, it's probably this huge sigh of relief of like, oh my goodness, it's not just me saying this, because I think everyone goes through this. But did it change or evolve for you in the other returns?
I think it did slightly. I felt more confident in myself, but and look, I really enjoyed working. So I still had that drive when I was returning to make sure I was showing up in the way that I wanted to and was able to deliver and have impact. I think, though, probably the edge came off after the first one.
Yeah.
So probably I put a little bit less pressure on myself.
That's good. That's good. And so then where did it go from then, okay, right, I've had kids. Did you then also go, okay, I've had a bit of an identity shift as well, being a mum in a workplace? And I guess once you finish kids, then how did you then also then with that level up of like, okay, I want the next challenge?
Yeah. So when I came back, and particularly, I knew after my third that my third was my toughest child. So I well and truly knew I was
You're like, right, I'm
was
done.
done. Uh, I think you come back, it definitely changes you and how I saw myself. Um, the juggle is real. You have so many things to fit into a day. And I often say, if you want something done, you give it to a working mother.
That is
Because
awesome. Yeah.
I think we're masters of prioritizing, getting stuff done, and really focusing on what's important. And you're thinking about more than just yourself. So I don't think motherhood reduced my ambition, probably tempered it a little bit, or the impact that I wanted to have. It made me much more intentional, and I think it made me a better leader. I think I have a lot more empathy, and I'm a lot more deliberate now about how I think about, particularly for other working women, how I think about ensuring that they don't take a step back when they're coming back from parental leave, and setting things up. And particularly when I was in larger businesses, I was able to set up things like return to work coaching programs, which I would hope had a big impact on those senior women coming back, which I didn't ever have, but could see returning to work is not just about the work that you're doing. It's about everything that you've got happening around you. And so being able to try and play a small part in making that a little bit easier for people is definitely something I've taken really seriously as I've become a leader of businesses.
Well, thank you so much for on behalf of women that you have supported. But I think it's also a really good show to actually say that even though you didn't have it, it's something that you wish you did, to then be able to support women in the future, because it's so important in actually having that. As you say, we change so much in becoming becoming a mother. But also I like how you say consciously encouraging women not to take a step back, because that's often so many things. Everyone's got to, as you said, you go back into your comfort zone a bit. Once you've had kids, you may not think you're ambitious, but it's actually sometimes on the flip side, as you say, you've got more empathy as a leader, but you've also then got the opportunity to actually have that direction. You're like, no, I've got this real purpose to give for my kids as well.
Yeah, look, that's right. It's, and I've got 3 sons. So I'm not only thinking about what I can do for other women, but also then how I raise them to make it easier for the next generation of women. I think that's why I was given 3 boys I think my personal experience has helped me really be able to, not just in terms of setting up programs, but I reflect on some of the earlier years when my kids, for example, were in daycare. And there was a time when my eldest, it was my first that was really hard, where every week he was sick. There was something
Yeah.
else that he was bringing home. And I was almost at a point, and particularly with your first, you don't know that that's actually only a really, in the grand scheme of things, short stage. But I was almost at the point of, I remember having conversations with my husband and my leader at the time saying, I don't think I can work. If this is the life, if this is my life now, like this is not possible. And thankfully at the time I had a leader who said, no, you'll be fine. You'll get through it. And we did. But I've now seen that in women that I lead, and not so long ago, someone who was saying to me, this is exhausting. If it's not one of them sick, it's the other. And I just don't know if I can contribute. And being able to say to people, you absolutely can. This is a stage and you're going to look back on this and it's actually a really short period of time. Do not step out now because of that pressure you feel. Let's just work out what you need to have around you to make this work for what is actually a really small part of your career.
Yeah. And how did you navigate that sickness period? Because I know that it comes up time and time again. And it is a real challenge, as you say.
It was really hard. And I think particularly at a time, again, and not that I'm saying that women who are going through that now have it any easier, but there wasn't the option to work from home. I felt like I was constantly trying to get them out of the car and into daycare, only to get a call that it was time to come and pick them up. I think my husband was a really big part of us making that work, because it was about who was best placed based on what was happening at work to take on that load. But I think particularly when they're young, I took that was a really heavy load that I carried there, and a lot of questioning around, am I doing the right thing? Am I making him sick because I'm putting him in this environment? And I look back now and I think, oh, I can look at it much more objectively, but it was a really tough period. And I'm really glad now that I didn't make rash decisions during that period, which wouldn't have seemed rash at the time, but now they would have been, given how short a time period your kids are that young for.
So much. So your advice then to other women listening that may be going through then the child sickness merry-go-round for that first 12 months of childcare, what would be your advice?
Hang in there, to get whatever support you can around you to get through it. Be kind to yourself, make it work. It's only a short time period that this happens, and you'll come out the other side.
Oh, that's great advice. So thank you for that. And I know it does seem tough when you're in the middle of it, but as you say, it's a relatively short space of time in the grand scheme of things. And so, as I mentioned before, how did you find that your ambition changed since you became a mum? And then what was then the decision to leave, I would put in inverted commas, the safe role, to then start to elevate your career? Because your career trajectory, I would say, after kids has certainly been quite steep, which is also inspiring as well.
Thank you. I took a really different pathway. Once my youngest, I think he was 2 or 3, so still quite young, but I reached a point where I felt like I was at the right stage to make a change. For me, that was, I had wanted to study again for some time. When I did my undergraduate degree, it was all about just getting it done so I could enter the
P's
workforce.
get degrees. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And I'd started to explore things outside of a core legal role, and I recognized that it was going to be quite hard because everyone saw me as a lawyer. It was also partly for me about confidence. So I had really moved into business roles, and I did an arts law degree. And from the time I'd sort of entered, I had in the back of my mind, I should have done business. And the people who I was working with were saying, no, you don't need that. But I really felt like I did. And so I took that opportunity to really, and it was a risky decision, to leave and to finish my MBA. And so at that point, I didn't have a role to go into. I finished my MBA and then took a very different path. And I don't think that would have been possible for me without doing something pretty different, because in the conversations I was having, everyone was trying to either put me into management roles in law firms, which wasn't what I wanted, or add other responsibilities to a legal role.
And what was the journey like of actually going through that pivot? Because I know there's a lot of women or even people that go through and go, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And do I do further study, or how do I do those career pivots and things? So obviously for you, it was doing further study.
It was. And my further study was to support a work that I had already started doing, even though it wasn't part of my role. And from the moment I started my study, I loved it. To have the opportunity to learn when it's not your undergraduate and you're just rushing to get it done, it was such a privilege in many ways to be able to. So I did a Master's of Management and then my Master's of Business Administration, and to have the ability to study and to be able to think about everything you're learning in the context of the work that you've been doing and that you've done. it's really powerful, and it gave me the confidence to say, I'm going to go and do something else. And that came, that's not then taking a role on the equivalent salary or anything like that. I really thought about the direction that I wanted to head in, which was very much in innovation and technology businesses. And I found a role that I felt I would get the best exposure to the sector and the best people to work with. And that's when I went across to Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures business.
Wow. And how did you navigate that? Did you just apply for a role? Because I know even working for Boston Consulting Group, which is, for those that don't know, probably one of the creme de la creme of consulting firms. They would sit above the big four up there with McKinsey. Like how did you land that role?
So this is where my decision to study was actually really important, because by going through that program, I was able to work with the careers team, and I did my study at what is now Macquarie Business School, which was MGSM at the time. So it was through those connections and them looking at, I did well when I was studying. And so working with their teams, they connected me at the time to McKinsey, to Boston Consulting Group. And actually the role that I ended up getting, I learned about through someone that I met in the MBA program.
It's amazing, the connections and things like that. So I did my master's in management as well. But yeah, it's amazing how much you actually can practically translate into the work, which it's so different for understanding it. Doing an undergraduate degree, you're like, I've got no context of what it's like to work. But when you're studying and working at the same time, it's so powerful. And then just on top of that, how did you manage studying with a family and just general life as well? Because I've been through the master's world and I've reflected going, I'm so glad I did this before I had kids. So I could not imagine having kids and studying.
It was, I think you've really got to want to do it. So I started it while I was working, and I had 3 kids, and I was also traveling. And then I made the decision. I was definitely finding it hard to juggle it all and be present and do the preparation. I could turn up, I could get things done, but I wanted to actually get the most out of it. And that's when I made the decision. So I left the role and I actually did the last part of my MBA studying full time. So I think that was about 6 months or maybe just under. So during that period, I did some contracting work and different pieces of work, but I actually left a full-time role. And that then gave me the space to really to engage with things on campus and the careers team and things like that. And then also prepare and find my next role. But I was very nervous about doing that. And it was really some, my friends and my husband kept saying, just do it. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. And everyone tells you that you're going to be fine. But that was definitely very uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, 100%. And so then obviously you then went to Boston Consulting and you were there for a few years and obviously then also then made other career transitions. How have you found elevating and lifting up your career and going for it? Like, have you always aspired to be a CEO, or is it something you just like, oh, look, this is interesting me and I'm going from there?
It was more the latter. So I didn't ever have the aspiration of a particular role. And it was really about the impact I could have and the work that I could do. When I came in, because of my seniority in a previous industry at Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures business, I was part of that leadership team and then went in from there really into a very early stage business. The digital ventures business that I was in was all about building startups and early stage businesses for large corporates. And that's where I really went, oh, I love doing this sort of work. And so I left there to join what was an early stage business at the time and work with founders. And again, not about the role or the title, but just the scope and the space that they gave me to really run every part of that business and work closely with them. And when the time came to leave there after 5 years, again, I didn't really have a particular role in mind, but I was approached for this role at Flexi Schools, and here I am today, 3 years later.
3 years later. Fantastic. And so how have you managed or juggled, probably more the point, of having And elevating up your career whilst also raising 3 boys. I've got 2 boys myself, and I know how full on boys can be.
I I think I have to say I have an incredibly supportive partner, and I think that that's critical. I couldn't do what I do, and he probably couldn't do what he does without each other. And so we run our household, I guess, very much as a team. But I've also had help at different stages, depending on where the kids have been at and their age. So whether or not that's childcare, at some points we had when the boys were younger and I was really struggling, we had au pairs, and we just try and put as much in place around us as we can. I think you can't lead at a senior level and personally then hold every detail. So it's about setting things up at home, setting things up at work, and then doing the best you can.
Yeah. What do you think are some integral parts, particularly as a senior female, to actually putting those systems in place, both at home and at work? Is it blocking out calendars, for example, of certain times that you may not be available from a work perspective? Like, how does it all, and I often refer to as work-life integration, we can't have one without the other.
Definitely. And I think that has changed again, right, depending on the stage that my boys are at. And so depending on the stage they're at and where we're at as a family has really then been for me about, is it a time to sort of hold steady and keep things as they are, or make change? So I think for me, it has changed. So it's interesting. When they were little, two of my boys, their birthdays fall in the middle of the month. And at the time I was traveling monthly for board meetings, and the board meeting would often clash with their birthday, and I'd be traveling interstate, and I'd say to the daycare team that that have the birthdays up on the wall, do not celebrate their birthday today. We're actually going to pretend it's tomorrow.
Oh.
I shouldn't say these things.
No, this is awesome. No, this is great.
We're very little at the time, and so that was my way at that point. Now, I mean, I would never do that. My kids know when their birthday is, and in fact, one of them had their birthday yesterday, and we had someone here at Flexi Schools who's leaving after many, many years of being here, and she had her farewell drinks last night, and I just said to her, I can't come. We'll do something to recognise you leaving, and we're doing something else today, but it's my son's birthday and I'm going to be there for him. So I think being really deliberate about the things that you need to prioritize for us, as well as in terms of the structure. As the boys have got older, we all work together to make our household work. So they each make dinner one night a week. So between the 5 of us, that's 5 evenings covered. When they were younger, it was more about then having someone come in the afternoon, or a babysitter that would get dinner ready. That's always been a big part for me. I find getting dinner on the table after a day of work when the kids are younger and things like that, that's always been a big part of my routine, is working out how we can either outsource some of that or have that ready so that I can do the last part, or my husband can. And I'm now past that childcare stage, but I think that after school support was really important. When my eldest went to kindergarten, everyone was saying, how's he coping with the transition? He was fine. I was the one that found it hard. I mean, the shift from being at daycare and then picking them up and bathing them, giving them something to eat and putting them to bed, to finishing at 3:00, after school activities, play dates, uniforms, notes about everything. I felt like I had everything coming at me from every
angle. Sometimes I'm in that phase. I've got one at school and one at kinder, and sessional kinder, and also childcare. And I feel like I've got all these notifications coming at me. And I'm like, childcare was easy compared to what school is.
I felt exactly the same way. And it's one of the reasons, though, why I was attracted to this role, was because it's probably the first role I've had where I've been able to combine my experience and day-to-day life as a parent with school-age children with what I do at work.
Because what is Flexi Schools?
So Flexi Schools is a payments and ordering app for parents. And what we do is we connect parents to all of the activities that are happening in a school. So it's canteen or tuck shop, uniform shop, events. So we really sit in the middle of a school community. We support more than 2,000 schools across Australia. And last year we had more than 1 million active parents throughout the year. So it's been really rewarding for me to come into a place, bring my technology and scaling and business skills into a space that I experience and live every day. And I was actually a Flexi Schools parent user before I took the role, which was one of the reasons why I was really interested in joining. And I felt like there was a big role for me to play as a parent and as a mother who experiences what we are trying to solve as a business every single day.
Yeah, it's certainly around that mental load and the notifications and things like
Definitely.
that. Because as you say, there's so much that's coming at us. Even my husband a couple of weeks ago said, "Have you seen this update on Story Park?" He goes, "No, there's too many notifications." And I was like, well, if you're not keeping across it, then the load's then falling onto me to keep across it. I was like, this is unfair.
And I at Flexi Schools, probably in an average month, 85% of our users are on the parent side are mothers.
Mm.
So, including in my family, it's really interesting. We were quite deliberate about sharing how we manage our family and really be supporting each other with our respective careers. But somehow that activity was with me, and
Yeah.
I think women and certainly carry that invisible mental load a lot more um, than
Yeah, as much as we try and delegate it, in some ways, sometimes like payments and the school stuff, it still keeps coming back. So
it
you said
does.
that you and your husband were quite deliberate. Did you sit down and actually have that conversation?
I will say we were quite deliberate, but I think we were both so naive. So we had no idea when we started having kids what we were in for.
I don't think anyone does.
It's probably right. But over time, yes. And I think, he has always been very supportive of what I do. We both wanted to have a family, but also keep working. I get a lot of enjoyment out of working. And I think I'm actually a better mother for having stayed. For me, I think it's a very personal choice, but for me, it was something that I didn't want to give up. And so the thought of not working was not really ever a consideration for me. And I think it's really important that women can make those choices and that they're
Yeah.
not imposed upon them based on what society expects or what someone else wants. It should be each family and each parent making those decisions themselves. So
And
we
also,
didn't.
just quickly on that, it's okay to actually want to work as well. And there's sometimes it's I know a lot of women will say, "Oh, I've got to work just for the money," and things like that. But then myself included, I'm like, I'd go cray cray if I wasn't working. And I'm the same. I'm a much better mother, wife, parent person because of working. But I think it's also, as you say, it's important that we own it and we embrace it. And it's okay to want to work, which I know maybe before we had kids, are like, oh, do I really want to work? But it's also that element. But I love what you said. It's like own it, but also share it.
I think you have to, and I feel more confident in saying that probably, well, I definitely than I did even when my eldest was born. And I, I found some of the mothers groups and things where everyone was talking about. I didn't have a lot of like-minded people in that
Mm.
group, which made me feel like, is there something wrong with me that I want to go back to work, or should I not be doing this? I'm so glad I did. And particularly now as my boys are getting older, they want less of me. I'm now the one trying to desperately spend time with them. Oh, what should we do? So that time that they need you in that way is actually quite small. And I've got,
Mm.
hopefully many, many years ahead of me of working and doing other things. And so being able to be deliberate about those choices. And it's so hard at the time to know and look into the future and say, oh, this is such a short period of time. But I look ahead now and think, I shouldn't say this out loud because, you never know quite what's going to come up the next day. I think at the moment I'm through most of the harder, like time intensive, that drop off, pick up, those sort of things. They need me in a really different way now. And then that's about setting up the routines and actually usually more making sure that the time that they want or when they need me that I'm there for. It's much harder to schedule like it was when they were younger, where it was about putting them to bed and things like that. It's about making sure I'm present, so that when those opportunities arise where they do want to share things and talk about things, that I'm there.
Yeah. And I often think that when kids are younger, they need you more physically. And as they're getting older, they need you there more emotionally. And it's, yeah, not that you need to necessarily, just because they're in school, they don't need you. If anything, they actually need you. Might sound, if you've got children, in daycare, they don't actually need you that much. But they actually, kids in school and that first transition is a lot. And so I think our kids, no matter what age they are, they need us, and just in different ways.
Just in different ways. Yeah. And you were asking me about the routines and what sort of things I put in place. All of my team knows that if I get a call between about 3:15 and 4:00, which is as my children are leaving school, I will answer it no matter what meeting I'm in, because I know then that they need me for something. So I'm very open with the team. If I'm in a meeting during the day, I usually wouldn't answer my mobile, but I always make sure I answer it to my kids. And then it's also about, I think making sure that, their things are in my diary as the do not move. Then the work parts are there. And then my non-negotiables could fall somewhere down, much further down the priority list. But that's how we try and make it work. And I travel, my husband travels, we discuss that well in advance. We try and make that work so that there's never both of us away at the same time. And I think technology also makes it easier now just for all of us to share calendars and everyone to know what's happening. And for us, dinner time's really important. So I'm always home for dinner and making sure that when they don't have their own sporting activities and things like that, but that we have dinner as a family, and then I can do any other work after that. So I tend not to stay late in the office. If I'm working after hours, it's
That's amazing. I resonate with so much around that. Yeah, it's good to hear it, and also know that, yeah, I guess you've got your set values and your non-negotiables, and obviously kids and family is number one for you, which is absolutely amazing. And so if do you believe there's a saying that women can't have it all? And sometimes there's beliefs that we can't. What are your thoughts on this?
okay. I do believe you can have it all, but not all at once. And someone gave me that advice that has really stayed with me. I think there are times when to expect that you can have it all the time, I think is unrealistic. And we've touched on this a little bit in our conversation. I think there's times where you're just keeping things steady at work because your family needs more of you. And other times when you can lean really strongly into your career. But I think it's also then about what having it all actually means, because if it means it's not the same as doing it all. So if it means that having a career and then personally doing everything else at home as well, then I don't know that you can really have it all.
Or you burn out very quickly.
That's right. That's exhausting and unsustainable. But I think if having it all is about having a fulfilling career and a connected family life, I think you can. And you've got to just be conscious of those different stages. I think we can have it all, but it's not then the same as doing it all. And it's not all at the same time.
No, definitely not. I would love to stay chatting with you, Rachel. There's so much of you that resonates, and I love your journey and your story, but I know that you're a busy person. So second last question for women listening today that are maybe still wondering, oh my goodness, can I still have a career? Can I also be a mum? My return to work experiences are varied and the like. What would you say to probably you're someone 20 years ago before she's embarked on having kids?
I would say, yes, you absolutely can. Please don't walk away. It might unfold a little bit differently to how you first imagine, and that's okay. But those time the intensive years of when you've got really young children are quite short. And as I mentioned, I'm now fighting for their time and wanting them to spend time with me. I think your career doesn't have to be linear to be successful. There's times when you're accelerating, there's times when you keep it steady. Both those pathways are valid and both contribute to a really long career. So I think motherhood can sometimes reshape ambition or career paths, but it doesn't have to end it. And I think often it makes it more purposeful and rewarding. So I would love to see less women opting out because they feel like they have to or they don't have any other choice. I think we need more female leaders, and I'd love to see people staying in and finding the pathway that works best for them.
Love it. Great advice. So just one last question to finish up, and I ask all guests this: what do you do for self-care and to fill your cup?
Very simple things, honestly. Time with family, friends. I enjoy eating out and catching up with girlfriends. I walk a lot, which gives me time to think and reflect and probably be quite purposeful with then how I spend my time. And I've learned to just protect small pockets of time that are just for me and not feel guilty about it, whether or not that's at the hairdresser or massages and things like that. I don't feel guilt about spending some time just on what I need. And I think that's so important because I think no one carries guilt like a mother does. Really so critical that women make the time for what's important for them, whatever that is.
100%. Where can people connect with you and also Flexi Schools?
So connect with me on LinkedIn. Please send me a message. I'd love to hear more about what other women are experiencing and mothers in particular and how we might all be able to improve and make things better. And you can learn more about Flexi Schools at flexischools.com.au. And I love hearing directly from parents and school communities, which is very much where all your listeners are sitting.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for today's chat, Rachel. It's definitely been insightful, but I would also say helps, I know certainly for myself as well, feeling seen and feeling heard, certainly in the juggle, but also that you can still have a career after motherhood, which I think is also really reassuring. So thank you so much and really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Carina. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank